a mysterious woman appeared behind an amber veil and left a trail of questions no one could answer. Welcome to Mystery Files. I am your host, Raven. Comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I always love reading your messages. Now, into the mystery. It was upon one of those bitter November evenings when London appears less a city than a vast and breathing shadow that Dr. John Watson found his old companion, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, in a mood of unusual stillness. The lamps along Baker Street had been lighted early, their yellow halos struggling weakly against the heavy fog which pressed upon the windows of 201B like damp wool. A coal fire burned low in the grate. The room bore all the familiar marks of Holmes' restless intellect. Chemical papers scattered near the breakfast tray, a Persian slipper drooping from the mantelpiece, 3 newspapers stabbed through with a penknife, and the violin lying untouched upon the chair where Watson had expected to find it in use. Holmes himself sat folded in his armchair, long fingers pressed together, his sharp profile outlined against the wavering firelight. His eyes were half closed, yet Watson knew well that no man in Europe was less asleep. "You have been to Paddington," said Holmes suddenly. Watson, who had only just removed his gloves, turned with a start. "My dear Holmes, I have not spoken a word. You have spoken volumes. There is a black smudge upon the lower cuff of your right sleeve, too oily for street mud and too fine for fireplace soot. It is railway grease. Your left boot carries a trace of pale clay, common upon the western approach near Paddington. You returned in haste, for your scarf is badly knotted. Yet you are not agitated, therefore the matter was professional, not personal. I trust your patient survived the journey." Watson laughed despite himself. "A young officer with a fever. He is doing well." "Then we may turn from fever to folly," Holmes replied dryly. "The newspapers have been shrieking all afternoon over a matter which Scotland Yard, I suspect, will shortly bring to my door." Before Watson could ask what he meant, there came the heavy tread of Mrs. Hudson upon the stairs, followed by a knock that bore more urgency than politeness. A moment later she entered with a card upon a tray. "Inspector Lestrade, sir. He says it is most pressing." Holmes did not rise. "Show him up." The inspector came in with his hat wet from the fog and his narrow face wearing that particular expression which Watson had come to recognize. Official irritation mixed with private alarm. Lestrade held a folded paper in one hand and a brown envelope in the other. "Good evening, Mr. Holmes, Doctor. I would not trouble you at this hour, but the affair has become rather singular." "So singular," said Holmes, "that you have already arrested the wrong man." Lestrade colored. "We have arrested no one yet. Then there remains hope for the innocent." The inspector gave a tight smile and drew nearer to the fire. "The case concerns Sir Reginald Ashcombe of Belgrave Square." Watson knew the name at once. Sir Reginald was a financier of considerable influence, known for railway investments, charitable dinners, and a pride so polished that even the newspapers treated it with caution. "He is dead?" Watson asked. "Not dead," said Lestrade. "Vanished." Holmes opened his eyes fully. "Vanished from where?" "From his own library, at precisely 8 o'clock last night, while his guests were dining in the next room, and 2 servants stood within 20 paces of the only door." Holmes' thin lips curved slightly. "Excellent. I thought you would say something of that sort," muttered Lestrade. "There is worse." 5 minutes before his disappearance, Sir Reginald was seen at the library window speaking to a woman outside in the fog. "A woman?" Watson repeated. "So the footman swears. She wore a veil. An amber-colored veil, he says, though how he could make out the color through that weather is more than I can say. She vanished as thoroughly as Sir Reginald himself." Holmes reached for his pipe but did not fill it. "You interest me." Lestrade handed him the brown envelope. This was found upon Sir Reginald's desk. It had not been there earlier in the evening, according to Lady Ashcombe. Holmes drew out a single sheet of thick cream paper. Watson observed that it was folded once, without seal, and that the handwriting upon it was large, slanted, and strangely uneven. Holmes read aloud, "At the 8th stroke, the debt shall be remembered. Let the amber veil be witness." Watson felt an involuntary chill, though whether from the words or the wind that rattled the window panes, he could not have said. "A theatrical villain," said Holmes, "or a practical man pretending to be one. Which is more probable, Lestrade?" "In my experience, Mr. Holmes, wicked men are often theatrical enough." "In your experience, wicked men are often convenient enough," Holmes replied. "Tell me the facts." Lestrade took out his notebook. "Sir Reginald held a small dinner last night. Present were Lady Ashcombe, their niece, Miss Evelyn Marlowe. Captain Arthur Vane recently returned from India, Mr. Silas Crewe, Sir Reginald's solicitor, and a certain Mr. Lionel Harcourt, a collector of antiquities. At 8:15, Sir Reginald left the dining room saying he had a private letter to write. At 8, the hall clock struck. Almost immediately afterward, Lady Ashcombe sent a maid to ask whether he wished the port brought in. The library was empty. Windows? One tall window looking upon the garden. It was found unlatched. Footprints? Several confused marks in the wet soil beneath it. We have preserved them as best we could." "Very wise," Holmes murmured, in a tone which suggested the opposite. "The strange part," continued Lestrade, "is that Sir Reginald could not have gone far unnoticed. The garden wall is high, the gate was locked from within, and the square outside was watched by a constable, who saw no gentleman leave the premises. Yet Sir Reginald was gone. And the woman? The footman, James Wilkes, was crossing the hall when he saw a shape beyond the library glass. He claims Sir Reginald stood at the window, one hand upon the latch, speaking urgently to a veiled lady outside. Wilkes was called away by the butler before he could hear anything. Holmes rose at last and paced to the mantel. His dressing gown swung about his thin frame, and his eyes had taken on that bright inward fire which Watson knew so well. A woman in an amber veil appears in a locked garden. A wealthy man leaves his guests and disappears from a library. A melodramatic note announces a remembered debt. The obvious conclusion, Lestrade, is that Sir Reginald was lured away by some woman from his past. That is precisely our view. Then it is almost certainly wrong. Lestrade's mouth tightened. "You have not seen the house." "No, but I have seen the note." He held the paper toward the lamp and examined it with a lens. Then he sniffed it, touched one corner with the tip of his tongue, and smiled faintly. Watson watched him with curiosity. "You have found something?" "I have found several things, none of them yet worth mentioning." Lestrade sighed. "That is always your way. My way has the advantage of not hanging men before breakfast." At that moment Mrs. Hudson entered once more, this time carrying a telegram. Holmes opened it carelessly, but Watson saw his expression sharpen as he read. "From Belgrave Square?" asked Lestrade. "No," said Holmes. "From Charing Cross Hospital." He passed the message to Watson. It read, "Unknown woman admitted 9:40 p.m. last night. No name given. Amber veil found among effects. Patient unconscious. Come at once if connected with Ashcombe matter." For a moment, none of the three men spoke. The fire cracked in the grate. Outside, the fog pressed thick and yellow against the glass. Lestrade was the first to recover. "Then we have her, the woman from the garden." Holmes folded the telegram with great care and slipped it into his pocket. "Perhaps," said he. "Perhaps?" Holmes turned toward the window, where the reflection of his face seemed thin and ghostly in the dark pane. "My dear Lestrade, in a case built upon appearances, the first duty of a rational man is to distrust what he is invited to see." He took up his coat from the chair and reached for his hat. "Come, Watson. The woman in the amber veil has entered the drama at last. The only question is whether she is its villain, its victim, or merely its most artful disguise." Within 10 minutes, the three men were descending through the yellow vapor of Baker Street, where the gas lamps burned like dim moons suspended in dirty water. A hansom was procured after some delay, for the fog had made the drivers cautious, and Holmes, with that impatience which seized him when a problem had fairly hooked his mind, twice leaned forward to urge the man to greater speed. Lestrade sat opposite us, his hands clasped upon his knees, while Watson watched Holmes's face whenever the passing lamps threw a momentary light. Across it, it was not excitement which marked those keen features, but concentration so intense that it seemed almost inhuman. "You believe the woman at the hospital is not the woman from the garden?" Lestrade asked at last. "I believe nothing," said Holmes. "Belief is the enemy of observation, but a veil may be worn, carried, planted, stolen, or described by a frightened servant who saw no more than a patch of color through fogged glass." Lestrade sniffed. "You make difficulties where plain facts would serve." "My dear Lestrade, plain facts are excellent servants, but the worst masters in the world. Tell me, did anyone in the Ashcombe household know of the message before it was found?" "Lady Ashcombe read it first, then Mr. Crewe, then myself, and the footman who saw the veiled woman. He had spoken of her before the note was discovered." Holmes made no reply, but the faint movement of his eyelids told Watson that the answer had not been without value. Charing Cross Hospital rose before us at last, its windows blurred behind the mist, and its entrance lit with a harsh white glare. We were met by a young house surgeon, Mr. Bellingham, whose professional composure had plainly been shaken by the unusual character of his patient. "She was brought in by a cabman at 20 minutes to 10 last night," said he as he led us along a corridor smelling strongly of carbolic and damp wool. He found her near the embankment, half insensible upon the pavement. There was no sign of robbery. Her purse contained 3 sovereigns and several calling cards, none bearing her name. "No name upon her linen?" Holmes asked. "None. Every mark had been cut away." Holmes glanced sideways at Lestrade. "That is a fact worth keeping." The woman lay in a small ward apart from the others. A shaded lamp burned near the bed, and in that softened light Watson saw a face of striking refinement, though drawn and colorless from shock. She appeared to be perhaps 30, with dark hair, damp against her brow, and features too composed in repose to belong to a common adventuress. Her hands lay outside the blanket. Holmes observed them before he looked at her face. "You have treated her, Watson?" asked the surgeon. "She suffers from exposure, exhaustion, and perhaps some narcotic influence. There is no serious bodily injury. She has spoken once only." "What did she say, mister?" Bellingham lowered his voice. "She said, 'Do not let him open the cabinet.' Then she became insensible again." Lestrade started. "Cabinet!" Sir Reginald had a locked cabinet in his library. Holmes bent slightly over the patient's right hand. "Not a lady's maid," he murmured. "Not a seamstress. Not a pianist. Curious." Watson, following his gaze, saw little beyond the pale fingers and the faint marks left by rings recently removed. "What do you make of her?" asked Lestrade. "I make nothing yet, but I observe that she has worn gloves too tight for her, that one ring was taken off in haste, and that the first finger of her right hand bears a small stain not produced by ink." The surgeon looked surprised. "I had not noticed it." "No," said Holmes. "You were occupied in saving her life, a habit which, though admirable, is sometimes hostile to detection." Upon a chair beside the bed lay the effects found upon the woman. The amber veil was placed foremost, as though the hospital authorities themselves had understood its theatrical importance. Holmes lifted it with the tips of his fingers and held it to the lamp. It was a long, fine veil of unusual color, not yellow, not brown, but that deep honeyed shade which might well have seemed spectral through mist and glass. "Expensive," said Lestrade. "On the contrary," Holmes replied, "made to appear so. The border is fine, but the body is inferior net. See where the dye has gathered unevenly near the fold. A lady of taste would not have bought it. A person of intention might." He raised it to his face, inhaled once, and laid it down. "Perfume?" asked Watson. "Not perfume. Smoke, river damp, and a trace of sealing wax. The last is interesting." From the purse Holmes removed the calling cards. Each bore the name of a different West End establishment. A milliner, a photographer, a theatrical costumer, and a dealer in antique fabrics near Covent Garden. None identified the woman, yet each seemed chosen to suggest a woman who moved in fashionable or artistic circles. "Too many clues," Holmes said softly. Lestrade frowned. "Too many." When a stranger is found unconscious with no name, no monogram, and no private letter, yet carries 4 cards, all pointing vaguely toward costume and disguise, I begin to suspect that someone has been generous to us. At that moment, the woman stirred. Her eyelids trembled and her lips moved soundlessly. Watson stepped closer with the surgeon, but Holmes held up one long hand, not to prevent aid, but to command silence. The woman's eyes opened. They were dark and fever-bright, filled first with confusion and then with terror. "Where am I?" she whispered. "You are safe," said Watson gently. "You are in hospital." Her gaze passed from Watson to Lestrade, and from Lestrade to Holmes. At the sight of Holmes she seemed to recognize, not the man, but the danger of inquiry itself. "No police," she breathed, "no police." "I am not the police," said Holmes. Lestrade gave a small offended cough, which Holmes ignored. The woman struggled weakly to rise. "He will die if it is opened." "Who will die?" asked Holmes. She pressed her hand to her throat. "The man with the white scar. Tell Sir Reginald." "Sir Reginald Ashcombe is missing," said Lestrade sharply. The effect was immediate and extraordinary. The woman's face lost what little color remained to it. She stared at him as if he had spoken a sentence in an unknown tongue. "Missing?" she repeated. No, that is impossible. I saw him after." Holmes leaned closer. "After what?" But the strength had gone from her. She sank back upon the pillow, her breath quick and shallow. The surgeon intervened firmly, and though Lestrade attempted another question, Holmes drew him away with surprising decisiveness. "You will get nothing by frightening her," said he, "and possibly everything by allowing her to live." In the corridor, Lestrade burst out. "She saw him after 8. That proves she was with him. It proves only that she claims to have seen him after some event she has not named." "Mr. Holmes, you split hairs." "No, Lestrade, I examine fibers. A hair may hang a man. A fiber may save him." He turned to the house surgeon. "This woman must be watched. No visitor is to see her without your knowledge. If she speaks again, write down her exact words." "Exact, mister." "Bang, not their sense, not your interpretation, but the words." The young man nodded gravely. As we left the hospital, the fog had thickened until the cab lamps in the street seemed to float without horses beneath them. Holmes paused upon the steps and stood for a moment, looking eastward, where the river lay hidden under its cold and poisonous blanket. "Belgrave Square," he said abruptly. Lestrade looked astonished. "Now it is nearly 10, all the better. Houses speak most truth when their inhabitants believe the day's performance is over." Our cab took us westward through streets muffled almost to silence. At intervals came the hollow beat of a constable's boots, the distant rattle of wheels, or the cry of some unseen vendor turned mournful by the fog. Holmes sat with the amber veil folded upon his knee, for he had obtained permission to carry it temporarily, and once Watson saw him compare its edge to the note found upon Sir Reginald's desk. Whatever he discovered there, he kept it locked behind that pale, unreadable face. Belgrave Square emerged at length in solemn outline, its great houses standing in ordered gloom behind iron railings. The Ashcombe residence was lit upon the lower floors, and a constable stood at the gate. Lestrade's name admitted us, and we were received by a butler whose face possessed that trained emptiness by which servants of wealthy houses conceal both knowledge and judgment. "Her ladyship has retired," said he. "Mr. Crewe remains in the morning room. Inspector." "We shall see the library first," Holmes said. The butler hesitated only a fraction of a second, but Holmes saw it. "You object?" "No, sir, only. The room has been much disturbed by the police." "That," said Holmes, "is a misfortune to which I have become resigned." The library was a handsome apartment at the rear of the house, lined with dark shelves and heavy curtains. One tall window opened upon the garden, and near it stood a broad writing desk. A clock of black marble rested upon the mantel. Its hands showed 8:15, though the hour was now close to 11. "Stopped?" asked Watson. "Stopped by design," said Holmes without touching it. "Dust disturbed on the right side. Someone moved it after it ceased to be useful as a clock." Lestrade stared. We noted that it had stopped. "I do not doubt it." Holmes crossed to the window. Outside lay the garden, a rectangle of wet darkness enclosed by high walls. Beneath the sill, the soil was covered by boards and canvas placed by the police to preserve the marks. Holmes knelt, lifted the edge of the covering, and examined the ground with his lens. Lestrade watched with arms folded. "Well," he asked. "There are the prints of a man's boot, a woman's shoe, and your constable's left foot." Lestrade flushed. "That may be. There is also," Holmes continued, "the impression of something which was not a foot at all." Watson bent closer but saw only a shallow, oval mark in the softened earth. "A cane," he suggested. "No, too broad, too flat, and repeated twice only." "Interesting." Holmes rose and examined the window latch. Then he turned to the desk. Its surface held an inkstand, blotting paper, several sealed letters, and a narrow gap in the dust where some object had recently stood. "The cabinet?" Holmes asked. Lestrade pointed to an ebony cabinet against the wall, no higher than a man's chest, bound at the corners with brass. Its door was shut, and across the keyhole had been fixed an official strip of paper bearing the yard's seal. "Locked when we found the room," said Lestrade. "Lady Ashcombe says Sir Reginald alone kept the key, and the key gone with him." Holmes' eyes glittered. "Ah." He stepped toward the cabinet but did not touch it. Instead, he lowered his face until his nose was almost level with the brass-bound door. "Watson," he said. "What do you smell?" Watson obeyed, feeling somewhat foolish. "Varnish, old wood, perhaps metal polish." "Nothing else?" "No." "Good. A doctor's nose is honest if not trained." Lestrade made an impatient movement. "Is the cabinet important?" Holmes straightened. "A woman who may be dying begs that it not be opened. A missing man kept its key. A stopped clock stands in a room from which he vanished. Yes. Lestrade, I think we may permit the cabinet some small importance." The library door opened then, and a thin, gray-haired gentleman in a black frock coat appeared upon the threshold. His face was long and melancholy, but his eyes were restless. "Inspector, Lady Ashcombe wishes to know how much longer this intrusion must continue." Lestrade turned. "Mr. Silas Crewe, Sir Reginald's solicitor." Holmes bowed slightly. "And a man who writes frequently with a broad-nibbed pen suffers from sleeplessness, and has recently burned a document he regretted keeping." Mr. Crewe froze. Watson saw Lestrade's expression sharpen. Holmes smiled without warmth. "Pray do not be alarmed. Your cuff is inked, your eyes betray you, and there is ash upon your left sleeve, though no fireplace has been lit in the morning room. I merely state what your tailor could have told me more expensively." Mr. Crewe recovered with visible effort. "I hope, sir, that cleverness will not be mistaken for discretion in this house, nor secrecy for innocence," said Holmes. For a moment the two men looked at one another, and Watson felt that some quiet duel had begun between them. Then from somewhere above stairs there came a woman's cry, sharp, brief, and filled with such terror that even Holmes turned instantly toward the door. The butler appeared in the hall, pale for the first time. "It is Miss Marlowe, sir. She has found something in Sir Reginald's room." Holmes was already moving. "Come, Watson," said he. "Our vanished man continues to leave traces behind him, and I am curious to know whether he does so by accident or by invitation." Holmes passed up the staircase with so swift and silent a step that Watson, though close behind him, was reminded less of a man answering an alarm than of a hound that had caught some distant scent. Lestrade followed with heavier tread, while Mr. Crewe came after us in a state of agitation which he made no successful attempt to conceal. The butler led the way along a broad corridor hung with somber family portraits, all stiff collars, folded hands, and painted eyes that appeared to watch our intrusion with ancestral disapproval. At the far end, a door stood open, and within it we found Miss Evelyn Marlowe. She was a young woman of perhaps 24, pale, dark-haired, and handsome in that grave fashion which owes more to expression than to color. She stood near a mahogany wardrobe, one hand pressed to her breast, while the other pointed toward a small table beside the bed. Lady Ashcombe, who must have arrived only moments before us, sat rigidly upon a chair, her face white and severe beneath its crown of silver hair. Captain Arthur Vane stood by the mantel, erect and sun-browned, with a soldier's instinctive dislike of appearing moved before strangers. "What is it?" demanded Lestrade. Miss Marlowe tried to answer, but her voice failed her. Holmes, without asking permission, crossed to the table. Upon it lay a silver-backed brush, a watch chain, a pair of gloves, and a small square of paper folded twice. Beside the paper was a ring, a heavy gold signet engraved with the Ashcombe crest. Lestrade gave a low exclamation. "Sir Reginald's ring!" Lady Ashcombe rose sharply. "That was upon my husband's hand last evening." "Are you certain?" asked Holmes. "I have seen it every day for 30 years. Holmes took neither paper nor ring at first. He bent above them, studying their positions with minute care. Then he looked at Miss Marlowe. "You found them so?" "Yes," she whispered. "I came only to see whether my uncle had perhaps left some note among his private things. The drawer of that table was open. The paper was inside it. The ring fell when I drew the drawer out." "Fell from where? From beneath the paper, I think." "I cannot be sure. I was startled." "Naturally," said Holmes. "You touched the ring?" "No, the paper. I opened it." Lestrade stepped forward. "What does it say?" Holmes lifted the paper with his pocket forceps and opened it beneath the lamp. The message was brief, written in a cramped hand unlike the bold writing of the note in the library. "Forgive me. I cannot bear the shame. The cabinet must remain shut, or all is lost." Lestrade's eyes brightened with professional satisfaction. "There, Mr. Holmes. Sir Reginald wrote that himself before fleeing." "Indeed," Holmes murmured. "It is plain enough. He leaves a confession, removes his ring, and makes his escape through the library window. The woman follows, perhaps quarrels with him, and later collapses near the river." "A moving domestic drama," said Holmes. "Only it has the defect of being absurd." Lestrade stiffened. "Absurd?" "Completely. Sir Reginald was a proud man, was he not, Lady Ashcombe?" "My husband," said her ladyship coldly, "was a man conscious of his position." "Precisely. Such men do not leave apologies in bedroom drawers like frightened schoolboys. They issue statements, destroy enemies, or shoot themselves with elaborate dignity. They do not write, 'I cannot bear the shame,' upon cheap notepaper and hide it beneath a ring." Captain Vane made a sudden movement. "You speak rather freely of a gentleman who is not here to defend himself." Holmes turned his pale eyes upon him. "That is why I speak freely. Those who are present may defend themselves if required." A flush rose beneath the captain's tan, but he said no more. Watson, meanwhile, had been watching Miss Marlowe. At Holmes's words regarding shame, she had lowered her eyes, and once her glance had moved almost involuntarily toward Mr. Crewe. The solicitor observed it also, for his fingers tightened upon the brim of his hat. Holmes now examined the drawer from which the paper had been taken. It was shallow and lined with faded blue silk. Within it lay nothing of consequence: a broken pencil, 2 old theater programs, a glove button, and a visiting card yellowed with age. Holmes read the card and gave no sign of interest, though Watson noticed that he slipped it slightly aside with his fingertip so that the lamplight fell upon its corner. Then he closed the drawer. "Who had access to this room after Sir Reginald disappeared?" he asked. "The household," said Lestrade. "And ourselves. No guests?" Captain Vane answered before the others could speak. "We were all questioned below. None of us came here." Holmes looked at him. "Yet you know the question concerns the guests." "I assumed it must. A dangerous habit, Captain." Lady Ashcombe's impatience broke through her restraint. "Mr. Holmes, this is intolerable. My husband has vanished under circumstances that disgrace this house, and now my niece is terrified by some object planted in his room. I ask you plainly, is Sir Reginald alive?" Holmes' expression changed, not softened exactly, but became less cutting. "I cannot yet answer you, madam. I can say only that the evidence has been arranged to suggest despair, flight, and scandal. Whether it does so truthfully is another matter." "Arranged," repeated Miss Marlowe. "Yes, badly in one place, cleverly in another." Lestrade gave a short laugh. "You find a trick in everything." "Because, my dear Lestrade, in this case everything insists too loudly upon being believed." Holmes turned suddenly to the wardrobe. Its doors stood open, revealing coats and evening clothes hung with military precision. He touched the sleeves, examined the boots beneath, then knelt before a traveling trunk bound in black leather. "This trunk has been moved recently." The butler, who had remained at the doorway, said, "Sir Reginald returned from Yorkshire 3 days ago, sir. It may have been then." "It may," Holmes replied, "but it was not." He pointed to the carpet. 2 faint dark arcs marked where the trunk's brass corners had dragged. "The dust line is fresh. Also, the left strap has been buckled by a hand unaccustomed to this trunk." Captain Vane stepped nearer. "What do you imply?" Holmes ignored him and opened the trunk. It contained folded linen, a rug, an empty collar box, and at the bottom, hidden beneath a layer of shirts, a woman's glove. It was of grey kid, small, elegant, and torn across the palm. Lestrade seized upon it instantly. The woman from the garden again. Holmes took the glove and placed it beside the amber veil which still lay folded over his arm. The colors did not belong together. The glove was restrained and expensive, the veil theatrical and cheap. "Not the same woman," Holmes said softly. "How can you know that?" asked Lestrade. "Because the owner of this glove had taste." Miss Marlowe, who had been motionless until then, gave a faint sound. Watson turned in time to see the captain look toward her, not with surprise but warning. Holmes saw it also. "You recognize the glove, Miss Marlowe?" "No." The answer came too quickly. Holmes regarded her in silence for several seconds, and under that gaze her composure seemed to thin like ice under pressure. I may have seen one like it," she added. "Many ladies wear grey gloves." "Many ladies do," said Holmes. "Few tear them across the palm upon brass fretwork." He rose and crossed back to the ebony cabinet in the library below, so suddenly that we followed him almost by reflex. There, without touching the yard seal, he held the torn glove near the cabinet door. Along the brass ornament near the keyhole, there was a minute jagged projection. The torn line of the glove matched it with dreadful neatness. Lestrade drew in his breath. "Then some tried to open it." "Someone wearing this glove tried to open it," Holmes corrected, "and failed. Apparently." At that moment Captain Vane entered behind us. His face was now set and pale beneath its bronze. "Inspector," said he, "I think this farce has gone far enough. That glove belongs to Miss Marlowe." Miss Marlowe, who had followed as far as the threshold, uttered his name in a tone of reproach and alarm. Lestrade turned upon her at once. "Is this true?" For a moment she said nothing. Then she looked past us all toward the sealed cabinet. "Yes," she said faintly, "it is mine." The room seemed to contract around her confession. Lady Ashcombe gripped the back of a chair. Mr. Crewe's restless eyes dropped to the carpet. Captain Vane stood rigid, as if he had struck a blow and regretted it the instant after. Holmes alone appeared unmoved. "You tried to open the cabinet last night?" asked Lestrade. Miss Marlowe lifted her chin, though her lips trembled. "Yes? Why?" She hesitated too long. Holmes answered for her, but very quietly. "Because someone told you that whatever lay inside it would ruin you." The girl's face confirmed what her words could not. Lestrade saw it, and his manner became brisk with triumph. "Miss Marlowe, I must ask you to explain where you were between 7:45 and 8:30 last evening." Holmes glanced at Watson, and there was in his eyes a flicker of that dry amusement which so often preceded a revelation not yet ready for ordinary minds. "Yes," said Holmes. "By all means, let Miss Marlowe explain. But before she does, Lestrade, observe one small matter." He pointed towards stopped clock upon the mantel. "If Sir Reginald vanished at the 8th stroke, why does the clock bear upon its glass the print of a lady's gloved hand facing not toward the room, but toward the door?" Lestrade stared. "And if Miss Marlowe tried secretly to open the cabinet," Holmes continued, "why should she afterwards hide her own glove in Sir Reginald's trunk, where it was certain to be found by any competent searcher?" He paused, and the silence that followed seemed deeper than before. "No, Lestrade, we have reached not the truth, but the first layer of a very deliberate lie." Miss Marlowe swayed as Holmes spoke, and Watson, stepping instinctively nearer, thought for an instant that she would fall. But the girl possessed more strength than her pale face promised. She steadied herself against the doorframe and looked at Holmes with a mixture of fear and desperate hope, as though she had found in his disbelief of her guilt the first breath of mercy offered in that oppressive house. Lestrade, however, was not a man easily diverted once suspicion had taken root. Layer or no layer, Mr. Holmes, the facts remain. Miss Marlowe admits attempting to open the cabinet. Her glove is found concealed in Sir Reginald's trunk. A note speaks of shame. Sir Reginald is gone. I must have an explanation." "And you shall have several," said Holmes. "The danger lies in choosing the easiest." He turned to Miss Marlowe. "Who told you the cabinet contained something injurious to you?" The girl's lips parted, but no sound came. Her eyes moved again, swiftly and involuntarily toward Mr. Crewe. The solicitor's face hardened. "This is improper," he said. "Miss Marlowe is distressed. She ought not to be examined in this manner without advice." "Advice," Holmes replied, "is often the art of teaching silence to those who ought to speak." Captain Vane stepped forward. "I will not stand here and see Miss Marlowe bullied." "Then sit," said Holmes. The quiet insolence of the remark struck even Watson with surprise. Captain Vane's hand clenched, but Lady Ashcomb's cold voice intervened. "Arthur, enough. If Evelyn has brought this disgrace upon us, I will hear it." Miss Marlowe turned to her aunt with sudden pain. "Disgrace, aunt? I was trying to prevent it. By creeping into my husband's library? No. By preventing Uncle Reginald from destroying." She stopped, and a faint flush rose to her cheeks. Holmes' eyes narrowed. "Destroying what?" Again she hesitated, and this time it was not fear alone that held her. It was loyalty or shame or some unhappy mixture of both. "A letter," she said at last. "To whom?" "To my mother." The answer changed the room more subtly than if she had cried out an accusation. Lady Ashcombe stiffened, Captain Vane lowered his eyes, and Mr. Crewe drew one slow breath through his nose. Watson perceived that the name of Miss Marlowe's mother carried in that household some old wound imperfectly healed. Holmes did not press immediately. He crossed instead to the writing desk, picked up neither pen nor paper, but leaned over the blotter with his lens. Then he lifted it to the light and examined the reverse. "Lestrade, when your men searched this room, did they remove any papers from this desk?" "No." "Did anyone?" The butler answered from the hall. "Not to my knowledge, sir." "An admirable phrase," Holmes murmured. "It admits everything while promising nothing." He held the blotter near the lamp. "Watson, you have steadier eyes for faded impressions than Lestrade, whose vision is clouded by arrest warrants. What do you read?" Watson took the blotter. At first it seemed only a confused ghost of scratches and reversed loops. Slowly, however, portions of words rose out of the pale stain. "I can make out Calcutta," he said. "And perhaps Marlowe." "Yes, Marlowe. There is also a date, 1879. Miss Marlowe gave a faint cry. Holmes nodded. "That is better." Sir Reginald wrote, or copied, something concerning Miss Marlowe's mother shortly before he disappeared. Yet the note found upstairs would have us believe his thoughts were wholly of his own shame. Lestrade frowned. "The two may be connected." "They are connected. That is not the same thing as being honest." Holmes now turned to the stopped clock upon the mantel. Its black marble case was heavy, ornate, and ugly, with two bronze figures supporting the dial. He bent over the glass, upon which a faint smear, invisible from a distance, marked the place where a gloved hand had pressed. "When was this clock last known to be correct?" The butler replied. "It is wound every morning, sir, by Mr. Ames, the under-footman. And yesterday it was wound at 9. Did it keep good time? To the minute, sir." Holmes opened the glass case carefully with his handkerchief and turned the minute hand. The mechanism gave a stiff protest, then moved. He listened, tapped the side, and smiled faintly. "It has not stopped by failure. It was stopped." "At 8?" asked Watson. "At 8:15, said Holmes. Lestrade stared. "But it shows 8:15. My dear fellow, even a clock may be truthful when its owner is not. The question is why someone wished us to notice the wrong time after inviting us to believe the right one." He closed the glass and stepped back. At that moment a servant entered, bearing a small silver tray upon which lay a visiting card. He handed it to Lady Ashcombe, who glanced at it and made an impatient gesture. "Not now." Holmes was beside her before the card could be removed. "May I?" Lady Ashcombe seemed inclined to refuse, then yielded with visible annoyance. Holmes read the name. "Mr. Lionel Harcourt," said he, "the antiquities collector, one of last night's dinner guests. How considerate of him to return at such an hour." "He is called to inquire whether there is news," said Lady Ashcombe. "Or to discover whether there is evidence," Holmes replied. "Show him into the morning room." Lestrade gave Holmes a questioning look. "You wished to speak with him?" "I wished to look at him." We descended a few minutes later, leaving Miss Marlowe under Lady Ashcombe's stern supervision. The morning room was smaller than the library, decorated with pale wallpaper, gilt chairs, and cabinets filled with porcelain figures. Mr. Lionel Harcourt stood near the fire, a short, polished man with a pointed beard, quick black eyes, and hands that seemed too delicate for the heavy rings upon them. He bowed elaborately when we entered. "Inspector, this is dreadful, quite dreadful. Poor Sir Reginald. Lady Ashcombe must be prostrated." "She is not," said Holmes. "You are disappointed," Mr. Harcourt blinked. "Sir, nothing. You collect antiquities. A modest passion." "There is no such thing as modest passion." "What did you discuss with Sir Reginald last evening?" Harcourt looked from Holmes to Lestrade. "I do not see." "You will." The collector gave a nervous laugh. "Indian bronzes, chiefly. Sir Reginald had recently acquired a small object which I hope to inspect." "From Calcutta?" The question struck him like a pin hidden in a cushion. "I believe so." "What object?" "A cabinet piece. A ceremonial figure, I was told. I did not see it. Because it was locked in the ebony cabinet?" Harcourt's smile weakened. "Possibly." Holmes moved closer. "Mr. Harcourt, did Sir Reginald intend to sell it to you?" "No. At least, he had not agreed." "But you desired it?" "As a collector desires many things, and as a man in debt desires one thing in particular." For a moment all Harcourt's polish deserted him. His cheeks grew mottled, and his ringed fingers fluttered toward his waistcoat pocket. "This is outrageous. It is elementary. Your rings are real, but recently cleaned. Your cuffs are frayed beneath excellent sleeves. And you carry a pawnbroker's ticket folded behind your watch. A gentleman selling appearances usually does so because he has exhausted substance." Lestrade's expression sharpened. "Did you return to this house after leaving last night?" "No." "Careful," said Holmes softly. Harcourt moistened his lips. "I left with Captain Vane at 9:30. Ask him. And before 9:30, I was with the others." Holmes suddenly held up the amber veil. "Have you seen this before?" The collector recoiled, but the movement was too swift, too instinctive. "No." Holmes folded the veil again. "You lie badly for a man who buys old idols and new excuses." Harcourt's eyes darted toward the door. Watson had seen such looks in wounded men searching for escape. Before Holmes could speak again, a bell rang violently somewhere below stairs. A moment later the butler appeared, paler than before. "Inspector," he said, "there is a cabman at the servants' entrance." He says he carried a gentleman from this house last night." Lestrade sprang up. Sir Reginald the butler swallowed. "No, sir. He says it was Captain Vane." The effect of the butler's announcement was remarkable. Mr. Harcourt, who had stood a moment before trembling beneath Holmes's scrutiny, seemed almost relieved to find attention diverted from himself. Lestrade turned sharply toward the door with the expression of a terrier that has scented a fresh trail. Holmes alone remained still, though Watson observed that his long fingers had closed gently upon the folded amber veil, as though the cabman's words had touched some string already stretched within his mind. "Bring him in," said Lestrade. The butler hesitated. "He's at the servants' entrance, sir. He says his boots are not fit for the carpets." "A delicate conscience," murmured Holmes. "Let us go to him. Men speak more truth where they stand naturally." We followed through a green baize door and down a narrow passage into the warmer, less polished region of the house, where servants moved like shadows upon errands of their own. At the foot of the back stairs, beneath a hanging lamp, stood a broad-shouldered cabman with a red muffler about his throat, and fog still clinging in beads to the brim of his hat. He held the hat in both hands and turned it round nervously when we appeared. "Your name?" asked Lestrade. "Samuel Briggs, sir. Cab number 472. "You carried Captain Vane from this house last night?" The man glanced about, plainly uncomfortable in the presence of so many gentlemen. "If so be he's the soldier gentleman, sir, then yes. I took him up by the side turning, not at the front." "At what hour?" "Couldn't swear to the minute, sir. After 8 before the half. The fog was thick, and I'd just come from Eaton Place." Holmes stepped forward. "Describe the gentleman." "Tall, brown face, military mustache, coat collar turned up. He had his right hand tucked inside his coat, like as if it was hurt or cold, spoke short, same as officers do." Captain Vane, who had entered behind us unnoticed, gave a contemptuous laugh. "Many officers speak shortly to cabmen, indeed," said Holmes, "and few cabmen invent right hands." Vane's face changed by the smallest degree. Watson saw his right hand, which had been resting upon the back of a chair, slip slowly out of sight. Lestrade rounded on him. "Did you leave the house after Sir Reginald vanished?" "I left the front door with Mr. Harcourt at 9:30, as I said." "That is not my question." Captain Vane looked from Lestrade to Miss Marlowe, who had come down with Lady Ashcombe and stood now pale and silent at the passage entrance. His jaw tightened. "Yes," he said, "I left earlier. I returned before I was missed." A sound, half gasp and half whisper, escaped Lady Ashcombe. "Arthur, I had a private matter," he said. Holmes smiled thinly. "Most private matters in criminal inquiries have the misfortune of becoming public." Lestrade turned back to the cabman. "Where did you take him?" "To Craven Street near the Strand, sir. He told me to wait. He was gone maybe 10 minutes, maybe less. Then he came back with a parcel wrapped in brown paper and told me to drive to the embankment steps." "The embankment!" cried Lestrade. "Near where the woman was found." "Not far off, sir. He got out before we reached the steps and paid me double not to call out. I thought it queer, but fog makes many things queer." Holmes leaned in. "Did he still have the parcel?" "No, sir." "Did his right hand remain hidden?" The cabman frowned, thinking. "No, sir. When he paid me, I saw it plain enough. There was mud on the cuff and a scratch across the knuckles." Captain Vane's self-control broke for an instant. "This is monstrous. I did not harm that woman." "No one has said that you did," Holmes observed. "Your denial is premature." Lestrade moved quickly. "Captain Vane, I must ask for an account of this journey." The captain stood rigid. "I had received a message." "From whom?" He did not answer. Holmes' gaze traveled, not to him but to Miss Marlowe. "From a lady, no," said Vane sharply. "Then from someone who used a lady's name," the shot told. Vane stared at him and Miss Marlowe's hands clasped together. Holmes turned to Briggs. "This parcel its size?" The cabman shaped the air with his hands. "No bigger than a book, sir, but thicker. Heavy, maybe." He carried it careful. "Was there any smell?" "Smell?" Men rarely notice what they see, but they often remember what they smell. Briggs scratched his chin. There was a sort of sharp smell, like wax or them church candles, and something else, foreign, maybe. Holmes' eyes shone. Foreign is a large country, Mr. Briggs, but useful on a cabman's map. You may wait outside. Lestrade will require you again. The man withdrew, grateful to be released. For several seconds, no one spoke. The servants, sensing scandal, had vanished with admirable discipline, leaving only our little company beneath the wavering lamp. Lestrade drew himself up. Captain Vane, unless you provide a satisfactory explanation, I shall be obliged to detain you. On what charge? Said Vane. Obstruction at the least. Perhaps worse. Miss Marlowe stepped forward. No, he went because of me. Vane turned. Evelyn, be silent. I will not if they are to think. Her voice faltered, but she mastered it. I received a note yesterday afternoon. It said that if I wished to save my mother's name, I must persuade Uncle Reginald not to open the cabinet. I was frightened, I told Captain Vane. Why him? Holmes gently. Miss Marlowe's color deepened. Because he is my friend. A word which does much work in English society, Holmes remarked. Vane's eyes flashed, but he allowed her to continue. The note said proof of some old disgrace lay inside the cabinet. I did not know what to believe. My mother died when I was very young. Uncle Reginald never spoke kindly of her, I thought. Perhaps there was something that would ruin her memory. Captain Vane offered to help. He went out because another message came, telling him that a man in Craven Street had the key. The key to the cabinet? Lestrade demanded. Yes. Vane spoke now harshly. There was no key, only a packet left with a porter at a lodging house. Inside was a woman's veil and a scrap of paper telling me to take it to the river stairs if I wished Miss Marlowe spared public shame. I was a fool. I knew it even then. But I thought I might catch the blackmailer. And did you? Holmes asked. No. What became of the packet? I left it where I was told, beneath the third bench from the steps. I waited across the road. No one came, or if they did, the fog hid them. After a quarter of an hour, I returned here. With scratched knuckles and mud upon your cuff, I slipped near the embankment wall. Holmes' gaze rested upon him with pitiless calm. A soldier's lie, Captain. Direct, brave, and badly constructed. Vane flushed darkly, but before he could answer, Holmes had turned to Lestrade. You perceive our progress. Miss Marlowe is lured toward the cabinet. Captain Vane is lured toward the river. A veiled woman is found near that same river, carrying the emblem which Vane says he placed there. Meanwhile, Sir Reginald disappears through a window where too many footprints advertise too simple a route. It is a neat arrangement, but overpopulated with coincidences. Lestrade frowned, unwilling yet unable to dismiss the pattern. Then the same hand arranged all three? Possibly. Or three hands have been made to appear as one. Holmes walked back toward the library, and we followed, drawn by the authority of his movement. In that dark room, the sealed cabinets seemed to wait like a silent witness, its brass corners catching the lamplight. Holmes stood before it and removed from his pocket the visiting card he had taken earlier from Sir Reginald. S drawer. He placed it upon the desk beside the bold note, the cramped note, and the amber veil. Watson, said he, look at these three objects. What have they in common? Watson examined them with care. They all point in one manner or another to concealment. The veil, the notes, the old card perhaps. Good, but not enough. Lestrade? They connect the woman, Miss Marlowe, and Sir Reginald's past. Better, but still foggy. Holmes tapped the corner of the old visiting card. It bore the faded name of Mrs. Clara Marlowe, and beneath it, in a hand barely visible with age, an address in Calcutta. They are all substitutes, he said. A veil substituted for a face, a confession substituted for a motive, an old scandal substituted for a present crime. At that moment there came a hurried knock at the library door. The young house surgeon from Charing Cross Hospital stood upon the threshold, breathless and bareheaded, as though he had come in desperate haste. Mr. Holmes, forgive me. I was told I might find you here. Holmes' expression sharpened. The woman, she is conscious. She insisted upon sending for you. She says she has only minutes before they silence her again. Lestrade sprang forward. Who? The surgeon swallowed. She gave a name at last. She says she is Mrs. Clara Marlowe. Miss Evelyn Marlowe uttered a cry that seemed to freeze the blood in every listener. My mother is dead, she whispered. Holmes took up his hat. Then, said he, we must lose no time in questioning her ghost. Watson had never known darkness so complete as that which followed the shattering of the lamp. It seemed not merely that the light had gone out, but that the very air had thickened and rushed upon us. Men cried out, furniture crashed, and somewhere close at hand Mr. Crewe was calling upon heaven in a voice which suggested he had postponed that acquaintance too long. Holmes' command cut through the confusion with the sharpness of a pistol shot. The wharf, Watson. I stumbled toward the rear door, guided more by the cold breath of the river than by sight. Behind me came the thud of Lestrade's men forcing their way in from the lane, and before me the uneven beat of Dacre's crutch striking wood and stone with desperate speed. When I emerged into the yard, the fog swallowed me to the shoulders. A shape moved ahead, long and angular, clutching something against its breast. Beyond him a boat knocked softly against the rotten steps. Stop! I cried, drawing my revolver. Dacre turned. For one instant the amber figure flashed in the gloom, catching some wandering light from the river. Then he raised his arm, not to fire, but to hurl the idol into the Thames. He never completed the motion. Holmes came upon him from the side with the silent speed of a panther. There was a brief struggle, the scrape of the crutch, a sharp gasp, and both men swayed perilously near the edge. I sprang forward and seized Dacre's coat just as his foot slipped upon the green slime of the wharf. The amber figure fell, but not into the river. It struck the stones, cracked cleanly across its base, and rolled against my boot. Lestrade's men were upon us then. Dacre fought no longer. His face, pale under the scar, had the still rage of a man who sees not merely defeat, but exposure. Holmes stooped and picked up the broken idol. A fortunate accident, said he, though I confess I should have preferred to open it under quieter conditions. Inside the hollow base lay a roll of oiled silk, dark with age but intact. Holmes slipped it into his breast pocket before any hand could reach for it. Dacre looked at him with hatred. You have no idea what you hold. On the contrary, said Holmes, I have suspected it since the hospital window. The rest was swift. Harcourt was released, trembling and useless. Crewe was secured, protesting that he had been forced into every villainy by threats of ruin, and Dacre was placed under guard. Yet even then one question towered above all others. Where was Sir Reginald Ashcombe? Holmes answered it, not by words, but by action. He returned at once to Belgrave Square, taking with him Lestrade, myself, the cracked amber figure, and the oiled silk packet. It was near dawn when we entered the Ashcombe Library for the last time. The fog outside had thinned, and a grey, reluctant light pressed at the windows. Lady Ashcombe waited there, rigid and sleepless. Miss Marlowe sat beside her mother, whose hand she held as if afraid that death, rumor, or old cruelty might again snatch her away. Captain Vane stood near them, quiet now and deeply moved. Holmes crossed straight to the black marble clock upon the mantel. Lestrade, said he, you ask where Sir Reginald went. He never left this room by the garden window, but the footprints, arranged, a man's boots, a woman's shoes, and Dacre's crutch mark were placed there to create the illusion of flight and pursuit. The real exit was closer. He moved the clock aside. Behind it, hidden by the dark paneling, was a narrow brass catch. Holmes pressed it. A section of the bookcase beside the fireplace opened inward with a soft groan. Lady Ashcombe cried out. Behind the panel was a cramped recess, large enough for a man to pass through, with steps descending into darkness. The old servant's passage, Holmes said. Disused, I imagine, but not forgotten by the master of the house. Lestrade stared. Then Sir Reginald escaped through there. He did, but not in triumph. We followed the passage down to a small locked door opening into a former coal cellar beneath the rear of the house. Within, upon a chair beside a dead lantern, sat Sir Reginald Ashcombe. He was alive, though shaken, hungry, and humiliated beyond any punishment the law could have devised. His proud face had collapsed into grey lines. His evening clothes were dusty, and upon his wrist still hung the broken watch chain from which the cabinet key had been removed. When he saw Holmes, he did not ask who had found him. He seemed to understand that only one man could have done so. "It was Dacre," he said hoarsely. "He trapped me here." Holmes looked down at him. "No, Sir Reginald, you trapped yourself." Dacre merely locked the door afterward. The baronet covered his face, and in that gesture Watson saw the first honest movement the man had made. Back in the library, Holmes gave his explanation with the clarity of a surgeon laying bare a diseased organ. Sir Reginald received Mrs. St. Clair at the window, as she stated. He had already learned that Dacre was in London and that the Calcutta papers might destroy him. At 8 o'clock, he intended to stage a disappearance. The stopped clock, the theatrical note, the unlatched window, and the arranged traces in the garden were meant to suggest that he had been lured away by the mysterious woman in the amber veil. The amber veil itself was part of Dacre's machinery, but Sir Reginald adopted the drama because it suited him. He turned toward the baronet. "You moved the idol from the cabinet before dinner and hid it, intending to bargain with whichever enemy proved strongest. But Dacre had anticipated you. He used Crewe to place false evidence, used Harcourt's fear to conceal his own pursuit, used Captain Vane's honor to move the veil toward the river, and used Miss Marlowe's love for her mother's memory to draw the tension toward the cabinet." Lestrade frowned. "And the glove?" "Miss Marlowe did try to open the cabinet, but she did so before the final arrangement was complete. Her glove tore upon the brass. Dacre, or someone working under his direction, later hid it in Sir Reginald's trunk to make her appear desperate and guilty. It was too obvious. That was its defect." "And the clock?" "The clock was stopped at 8:15 because Sir Reginald passed through the hidden panel then. The handprint faced the door because the person who stopped it stood not within the room looking out, but near the mantel preparing the deception before leaving by the secret passage. The supposed 8th stroke was a lie built upon the hall clock, not the library clock." Holmes removed the oiled silk from the idol and opened it carefully. Within were letters, signatures, and accounts yellowed by time but still legible. Mrs. St. Clair gave one sob when she saw them. "They proves, Holmes, that Mr. Marlowe was falsely accused in Calcutta, and that Sir Reginald and Mr. Crewe profited by that falsehood. Dacre wanted the papers not for justice, but for blackmail. Sir Reginald wanted them suppressed. Mrs. St. Clair wanted her husband's name restored. Only one of these motives was honorable. Sir Reginald said nothing. Crewe, when confronted later, confessed enough to spare himself the worst charge and condemn his reputation forever. Dacre was taken by Lestrade's men before noon, though he maintained to the last that he was a collector, not a criminal. Harcourt, whose cowardice had nearly cost others dearly, withdrew from society with remarkable haste. As for Miss Marlowe, she learned in one terrible night both the loss and restoration of her past. And if Captain Vane remained near her in the difficult weeks that followed, I do not think Holmes considered it a matter requiring investigation. Several days later, in Baker Street, I found Holmes seated once more by the fire, the newspapers at his feet and his violin across his knees. The case had already become, in the public prints, a confused scandal of finance, foreign intrigue and family secrets. Not one account mentioned the print upon the clock glass, the cheap dye of the veil, or the oval mark of Dacre's crutch. "You are dissatisfied," I said. "Not dissatisfied, Watson, merely reminded." "Of what?" Holmes drew the bow once across the strings, producing a note so low and mournful that it seemed to belong to the fog itself. That crime, like bad theater, depends upon directing the audience's eyes. The average man sees the veil, the note, the open window. He applauds the drama and misses the stagehand moving the scenery. And you? I watch the stagehand. He leaned back, his sharp face softened by the firelight. Remember it, Watson. The truth is rarely the most impressive object in the room. More often it is the small thing someone hoped you would consider beneath notice. With that he began to play, and the strange affair of the woman in the amber veil passed from the alarms of London into that private gallery of mysteries where my friend's genius, cold and brilliant as winter starlight, shines still upon every shadow I have ever set down.